The work I want to do, I don't want to give people something. I want to help people find their intuition and wisdom within and act on that. Drug users especially have been so cut off from their inner power and made to say that they're powerless. People need to be made to feel empowered and that they do know the right things for them.
Hello, my lovers. Welcome back to Unbroken Chain. I'm really excited to share this conversation today. This is with a total psychedelic badass, Juliana Mulligan, who is doing really important work specifically in the psychedelic community, but it's really the work that needs to be done in the world at large right now, investigating and taking down the systems of colonization and patriarchy and white supremacy that are poisoning so many of our communities. So Juliana came on my radar because she wrote several articles in the past couple months about abuses that have gone on in the Ibogaine community. So Ibogaine, which is also sometimes conflated with Iboga, is a super powerful psychedelic. Iboga refers to a number of plants which come out of the Bwiti culture in Africa. And Ibogaine is the active compound in Iboga that can be synthesized from these plants. So if you've heard of this plant, you know that it has really come alive in the Western consciousness recently, specifically in the context of treating addiction. And in a lot of circles, it's been touted as a kind of miracle drug or silver bullet, which I think should be a red flag right away to anybody. But it does have seemingly a very powerful ability to reset the minds of people that have very long-standing relationships with opioids and other drugs, and also just people that are dealing with really deep trauma. And like any psychedelic, it won't do the healing work for you, but the particularly amazing thing that people report about Ibogaine is that it seems to completely mitigate withdrawal symptoms. So people who are really ready to make a shift in their life and end or significantly shift their relationship with a street drug can go to Central or South America to a treatment center and to have a physician-assisted experience with this medicine and come out of it seemingly with the tools to really follow through on those shifts. And this is, of course, exciting because the addiction industry in this country is deeply broken. It's rooted in capitalism, as much of our healthcare system is. And the reason that Juliana's work specifically with this medicine and in this community is so important, because we've taken this medicine, the Ibogaine, out of its original context. And we've brought it into the West to do this very specific thing. And with very little context, it's being manipulated by the same problematic practices that come through colonization and patriarchy and white supremacy. And it's really important, this is something I've talked about before, that the revolution that we're undergoing right now, the awakening of consciousness, the return to earth-based practices, it's important that our relationship to it is actually about healing. And that doesn't just mean treating individuals that have suffered at the hands of this culture and are dealing with things like addiction as a result, but it means actually breaking down the oppressive and traumatizing systems themselves. And while Ibogaine is not legal in the United States, I think you'll hear that in the way that Juliana describes the clinics that are popping up in other countries, there's a really high risk for things to go wrong when this medicine is not held in any kind of wisdom lineage. It's pretty dangerous. It's cardiotoxic, unlike any other psychedelic medicine that's come into Western awareness recently. So I'm totally in awe of Juliana. I think her courage and her vision for how to bring a context to this medicine that will make it sustainable and safe is so important, and she's really walking the walk. She has 8 years of experience working in the Ibogaine community, and she founded Inner Vision Ibogaine, which is all about prep and integration after these experiences, which is so important when you get your entire life blasted apart, that you have some kind of way to actually use that in the 3D matrix that we all have to navigate, which caused the trauma in the first place. And I think her focus on women as healers is something that needs to be talked about in every corner of our society right now. It's often not popular to speak truth to power, especially when you're challenging people at the top of the hierarchy. And I have so much love and respect for Juliana for doing that, because it's really on behalf of all of us. It makes everybody safer and opens the door for all of us to have honest conversations about abuse. So may her example remind all of us that we can, and in fact are called to, use our voices and our gifts to do the same. Thank you for being here. I love you. And here is Juliana Mulligan.
So I have been working in the community or involved with the community for 8 years, working in clinics, supporting people working in clinics, doing like consulting and education with people who are interested in Ibogaine. And now I am running Inner Vision Ibogaine, which is my business that helps people to prepare for and integrate after Ibogaine treatments. And I've also just started a collective with 4 women in the Ibogaine community to work on the issues of accountability, the lack of safety, abuses that happen in the community, and to create ways to support those working in clinics better and to enforce standards, because there's nobody doing that so far.
Thank you. Thank you for stepping up to that. Where did your relationship with Iboga start?
So I did Ibogaine in 2011 after having a 7-year opioid dependency, and after going through the mainstream drug treatment system in the United States, including 12-step programs, methadone, Suboxone, multiple rehabs, and the justice system. I did 3 months in county jail in South Florida for a drug-related charge. So I kind of tried all the conventional methods. None of those things worked. And so I found Ibogaine, and that's what worked. I had a very atypical Ibogaine treatment. Ended up in a hospital having 6 cardiac arrests and on a pacemaker because the providers were not following very basic, even the most basic safety standards, which is also part of my inspiration to do the work that I want to do in the future, because scenarios like that are totally avoidable. But despite that happening, I still came out of Ibogaine feeling pretty amazing and really inspired and excited about life for the first time in years. So Ibogaine worked for me, and that was that, and I left opioids behind. And then a year later went to my first Ibogaine conference and met the community, and that's how I became involved.
Wow. So my sense with Ibogaine is I don't feel particularly called to it in this lifetime, because I have this immense respect for it, that the sense that I have from it is this is a very powerful medicine that should be used for very emergency situations. Is that kind of an accurate sense of it?
No, I don't think it necessarily has to be for emergencies. I think it's really designed for people that have something really challenging that they haven't been able to overcome. And I mean, it's definitely something that you want to feel called to. I would never talk anybody into doing Ibogaine. In fact, sometimes I try to talk people out of it and tell them to do ayahuasca first, because it's much more safe, affordable, accessible. Yeah, because Ibogaine, it's different than other psychedelics because you can die, and anybody can die from it, even with no pre-existing conditions and a completely healthy heart. So it's something that I really recommend doing for those that are really wanting to work on something and feel called to it. But it doesn't have to be an emergency. And actually, half of the people that I've helped treat in clinics were psychospiritual, not drug dependency related, depression, PTSD, anxiety.
Wow.
things like that. Mm-hmm.
Did you know that the stakes were that high potentially when you went into the experience?
No, I had no idea. I don't even remember how much research I did because I just knew that it was the thing that was going to work. Like I didn't really care what the risks were, and I actually was going to order it and take it myself, which thank God that I didn't because that's super dangerous. So yeah, I didn't know about the cardiac risks, and I really didn't understand what had happened to me until I went to my first conference because the guys that treated me were coming up with all of these insane reasons that I ended up having cardiac arrests, when really it was a very simple answer that anybody well versed in research knows why, because of its cardiotoxic side effects. But yeah, I didn't know until a year later, where I was like, oh, okay, that they gave me way too much Ibogaine and didn't stabilize me beforehand. So it was like really clear what had happened.
Yeah.
And I'm not the first one. I know personally of 3 other people who've ended up on a pacemaker from Ibogaine.
And is that because of an irresponsible facilitator usually?
Yes, but I know of one where it was a very responsible facilitator. What happened is the person was pretty dishonest about their drug using, and so they were using meth closer to the treatment that they had acknowledged. And meth affects your cardiac rhythms, so you can't be doing it within, like, I would say 2 weeks of Ibogaine. So she was not honest about that.
So in an ideal scenario where things do go well, could you paint a little bit of a picture of what that container looks like?
Yeah. So, every clinic operates so differently, but what it looks like is that there's super thorough medical screening process before you go, with the EKG and a liver panel and a metabolic panel blood test, and like full disclosure of medical history. Ideally, I think that you should be in communication with the provider for a couple of months to really get to know each other. And especially for the providers, so they can really know who you are and see if you are willing to put in the work. Like getting the test, staying in communication, reporting about your diet, reporting about how your stomach is, all these things. Because what I've seen is when people don't show up for the preparations, those are the people that actually don't do well after Ibogaine, because they weren't really ready to put in the work and they don't really want to leave drugs behind yet. Not always, but these clinics that like get on the phone and want to get you down in 3 days, I'm very suspect of this. I think that there needs to be a relationship established, because it is so dangerous and you want to really know who you're working with. And then once you're there, definitely EKG machine, AED machine present. Ideally, they would have you on a heart monitor for the whole treatment. Minimum would be like having an EKG machine there in case the blood pressure and pulse aren't looking good. Also, minimum 50% staff needs to be women. There's a ton of clinics where they're like run by men, mostly male staff, or the women on staff are like just doing the cooking and the cleaning, things like this. One of the main facilitators needs to be a woman, especially for women patients, but for everybody, because there needs to be a balance.
What do you see happening when that's not the case?
It's hard to sum this up quickly, but there is just a way that men in this community have very deeply ingrained patriarchal, colonizing, abusive ways of interacting with people. The issue is that many people running clinics were former drug users themselves. Did Ibogaine become very evangelical about it? And then they immediately want to open a clinic without having done any of their own personal internal work, which, even a year or 2 of being in therapy after getting off drugs with Ibogaine, I don't even think you should be running a clinic then. This is like years of programming and damage. It's not going to get undone by Ibogaine overnight, or even in a year or 2. So there's these guys coming in with unaddressed trauma and unaddressed abusive patterns that open clinics, and the way that they interact with people is very extractive. It's very like one-sided. And these are generalizations. Like, there are exceptions. I do know good men working in the community, but the majority I would not send people to. And honestly, all the clinics I recommend right now are run by women. They're the best providers in the community. The safest providers in the community right now are women. So I'm not saying that men can't do it, but there needs to be a woman present. There's just a multidimensional way that women are able to approach and understand other human beings that men just don't have because of the way our society has been constructed.
I'm so grateful to hear you say that in such plain, clear language, because that's reckoning that needs to happen in every corner of our society right now.
Yeah, definitely. And this also, there are women doing abusive things too. Like I was telling you earlier, women have internalized patriarchy, and women perpetuate these extractive kind of abusive dynamics as well. And so it's not that being a woman makes you like exempt from these patterns. That's also an issue too. Even some of the women in the community that I would consider allies have been abuser apologists a little bit when it's come to me bringing things up about somebody they know that is upsetting for them. So there still is that issue too. And so you can't just say, oh, if it's a woman-run clinic, it's okay. I think when people are looking for clinics, I would suggest like getting a lot of reviews and like asking them like, who can I talk to who's been to your clinic? And getting on the phone with people and really asking them about their experiences and reading about reviews online.
Can you speak to why the price tag is so high?
Well, the price, every clinic does their pricing differently. But what I can tell you is that when I worked at a clinic that was charging $5,000 a week, none of us, or most of us, weren't actually really getting paid. Like it was paying for our room and board, and that's because of the medical overhead, paying for the doctor, paying for the medical equipment, paying for the rent, paying for the cooking, really we were barely breaking even, charging $5,000 a person for 1 week.
Wow.
And I think it's because of the cardiac element and the medical monitoring that really needs to be in place.
Well, you mentioned colonizing attitudes when you were talking about some of the behaviors of men in positions of power. I want to ask you about like sustainability around the medicine too, and where it's coming from.
Yes, so that's a big issue. So Iboga only grows in southern Cameroon and Gabon and a little bit of the Congo. And it comes from a religious practice called Bwiti that's been practiced for thousands of years. I don't think they really know a definitive number, but it's very ancient. And they've been using it as a rite of passage initiation tool. It kind of accidentally got discovered for its anti-addictive properties by Howard Lotsoff. That's not what they're using it for in Gabon. Yeah, they use it as a part of their like traditions and their initiations. So yeah, they're using it in a very different context. And the issue with Ibogaine becoming so popular in the West is that now there's a lot of opportunists and poachers that are stealing iboga out of protected forests and selling it online. And there's villages in Gabon that don't have iboga anymore, and they're using alcohol instead, which is horrible. So it's really tricky. Sourcing medicine is really, really tricky. There's tons. Every week there's new iboga sellers popping up, and you just don't know. The only ones I trust are like, they only sell to clinics and providers because they don't want people to die, and just like mail it to people at home. But mostly I would say it's like poached or stolen iboga. There is an organization called Blessings of the Forest who is working on these issues, and like their main priority is to get a supply for the traditional peoples that use it and make sure that that's guaranteed. But it's tricky, and it takes a lot of money because you can't use iboga until it's 5 to 10 years old. There's no ibogaine present. So it's like, if you think, I'm going to start a plantation and replenish the iboga. It's like, well, you have to pay for it for 5 to 10 years before you get any return. So there's not a simple solution. The one alternative solution there is right now is there is a tree that grows really plentifully all over West Africa called the voakonga tree, and the alkaloid in that tree bark is called voacangine, which is easily converted into ibogaine in a lab. So really what clinics should be doing is guaranteeing that they're only using Boakanga sourced ibogaine. And that's the best way to give iboga a break.
That's interesting because I feel like it's such a sign from that plant, ayahuasca too, that it's like it's demanding that we be in intimate long-term relationship with it, which is just not the American capitalist approach at all. So I've heard that it's a several day ceremony and process, yeah?
Well, in Gabon, it can be 2 to 3 weeks.
Wow.
The ceremony depends on the village that you go to. But in clinics, obviously, it's a whole different thing. And then there's clinics that are kind of like claiming to be Buiti, but then also having the medical element. Like there's kind of a crossover thing that happens, which can be cool, but sometimes it's crosses the line into just complete cultural appropriation. And my personal opinion is, if you are white, you do not have a right to be profiting off of this plant from West Africa. And if you are profiting from it, you need to be giving a good chunk of your profits back to Gabon, because that's bullshit. That is extractive and it's colonizing. And so a lot of these clinics aren't doing that. And part of the reason is there's not like one trusted place to give money back to Gabon. Like it gets a little confusing sometimes. But there's just a lot of clinics that don't care. They're used to just taking whatever they want. That's the American colonizing way, So it's problematic.
So when you were trained to facilitate, were you following any particular lineage?
I wasn't really training in Buiti. That's not what I was really doing. Although the second clinic I worked at had elements of Buiti that were done, that wasn't like my primary interest. Like I was more interested in like the medical and psychological aspects. Although I enjoyed the Buiti stuff, it's like not what I feel particularly called to. But I want to honor it because this is where this medicine comes from that changed my life. So I love it, but I don't feel called to be like, this is my Buiti name and my lineage is this. Like, that's not my angle in all of this.
Yeah.
And it also just doesn't feel right to be doing that either to me completely. Like, it feels colonizing. So I trained, the first clinic I trained at, there was no Buiti. It was just purely medical. Although that clinic was run very poorly and is no longer open now. And then the second clinic in Costa Rica, we had some Buiti elements, but it was also mostly very like of the medical setup. And then the third clinic was with Claire Wilkins, who is one of the pioneers and elders of our community, who developed a very unique protocol, totally different than what other people do, where instead of one night of one big dose, you receive very small doses, once, twice a day, maybe, depending on the person, for a longer period of time, like 2 to 5 weeks, depending on what you're working on. And this is actually the safest approach and has the best results from what I've personally seen. And yeah, that was my favorite because it's really, her protocol is really tailored to work with each person differently based on how they're responding, based on their heart rate and blood pressure, attitude, mood. It really is. It's a hard technique to train in because you kind of have to be like an expert. It's like an art form.
It's so intuitive.
It's so intuitive, and she's super talented at it.
So when you woke up in the hospital after your blast-off dose, did you have any conscious recollection of the experience?
No, I didn't. Not really. There was only like one part that I kind of remembered, but it wasn't like during the main effects of Ibogaine. I think I don't remember anything because they gave me a bunch of Valium also, because I wouldn't like calm down. But then 3 months later, I remembered like a really little snippet of the visions. But that's all I got. But it kind of didn't matter because I felt that the work had been done. Like I was embodying it and feeling it when I woke up. Like I felt like all of this weight had been lifted off of me, and I saw how all of my years of suffering were actually my training to do the work I was supposed to do in the future. So it was really empowering, and it was totally against the narrative of the mainstream of like, oh, they're like sick and diseased, and it was like it totally transformed my experience to be empowering, to where it's like I didn't see what I had lived through as being sick or diseased. Like it became something that was my strength. And like that's the biggest thing that Iboga did for me, is show me that all of the things that happened are actually there to serve a purpose.
It makes me so emotional that a plant could give you that kind of forgiveness.
Yeah, totally. It was like instant. I felt super liberated and empowered.
Well, I'd love to unpack that a little bit. Like, what were the messages that you were receiving from the kind of mainstream addiction, quote unquote, recovery track?
Well, the mainstream is, they rely on the disease model, saying that addiction is a disease, and by definition of disease, it doesn't make sense at all. I would recommend people look up the work of Dr. Carl Hart to read a little bit more about that. But it's not a disease. It's not something that you have permanently. You're not sick for the rest of your life. I don't even want to call it a sickness either. And I don't even like using the word addiction, definitely not the word addict. It's like the issue is not the drug dependency. There is an underlying emotional issue before that happens. And the drug use was just a way to survive and be able to function in this society. The drug use is meaningful. It's serving a purpose. And when you qualify something as a disease, you disqualify all of the unique and powerful and valid experiences that are underneath the drug use. You're just throwing it all away, saying, oh, that's just a disease. It doesn't leave any room for exploration, and drug users are treated dehumanizingly. I mean, for years, I was treated like I didn't know any better. Like I have my intuition and inner wisdom, like really don't mean anything because I just need to stop using drugs and keep going to these meetings and keep saying that I'm an addict for years, even after I stopped doing drugs. And that's the only way out. It's very stigmatizing and imprisoning, and it completely disregards the fact that humans have an incredible power to evolve and change constantly. Like, if I said I was an addict now, that would be insane. Like, I haven't done opioids in 9 years. Why would I drill that into myself, And also just the fact that the word addict is incredibly othering and degrading and stigmatizing. Like, I have a friend who, over the years, kind of continuously relapses, but he's incredibly intuitive and loving and sensitive and very smart, and his family just constantly discredits him and thinks that he's lying because he still uses drugs sometimes. They just completely disqualify his humanity and his wisdom, and this is from his own family. And this is because of the programming of society about drug users. And it all originates for pretty much religious and political reasons. That's how our attitudes towards drug use have come, is political and religious reasons.
I have the sense, too, that so many people that are diverting their wounds or dealing with their wounds through addictive behaviors are like people that have some of the most profound gifts to offer society. But because we make no space for them, that's the only option, it feels like.
Yeah. No, society does not prioritize sensitive, intuitive, creative people. I mean, most of us went through a terrible public school system that surgically removes the creative, inspired element of children. I mean, if you think about it, we're expected to sit in the classroom for 7-8 hours a day, starting at 6 years old. It doesn't make any sense. And then if you can't do it, you get medicated. And then they wonder why people end up having issues with drugs when you were giving them essentially crystal meth from when they were children. It just doesn't make any sense. We beat children into fitting into a mold and then wonder when things go wrong, what happened. It's completely insane. And so, yes, drug users are usually very sensitive, very loving, very intuitive people. But if you're that sensitive, it's really hard to succeed in a patriarchal, colonizing, abusive system. You have to take drugs to sedate the intuitive parts of you to be able to function.
Right. Otherwise, your spiritual and physical and emotional immune system is just like on fire all the time.
Right, you're just screaming in pain because of the abusive system that is like everybody is telling you is the only right way.
So how did your experience with the plant medicine show you how to navigate an abusive world while still being open-hearted?
I don't know. I don't know if it was that, like, I don't know if knew that was the message at that time. For me, I was just like so excited to have found Ibogaine and to know that was going to be a part of my life's work that I just didn't care what else was going on. Like I went and started working and saving money and taking classes and then going and training in clinics. It was just like the sheer passion kind of drove me through all of it. But it's still hard. I mean, even with the article I wrote recently about the abusive experience I had with a member of the Ibogaine community, the abusive practices of society carry over into the psychedelic healing communities.
Yes.
Like, I'm still dealing with abusive patriarchal bullshit from people that are highly regarded in the community. And then other people in the community are try to apologize and justify the abuse. So it's still, like I've found a way to navigate through it, but it still comes up and it's still hard. And the only thing to do is just to call it out and to keep calling it out no matter what.
Have you been supported in that process? Are you kind of the first one cracking the door on this in this particular community?
I mean, we've all been talking about abusive stuff that happens in the community for years, but I don't think anybody has really, I haven't seen an article where somebody was like, there is abusive stuff happening in this community and we need to do something. I think I don't know if I'm the first one. Maybe somebody did a talk about it at a conference I wasn't at, but I haven't personally seen it called out directly and embark on a project to direct it. I mean, I guess, when we had our organization, the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance, which is not really operating right now, they had some processes to support abusive practices. Like there was a grievance process where people could contact us and then tell us about a bad experience they had at a clinic. But in terms of addressing it directly with the clinic, it was like the power was limited because the clinic could just choose not to participate if they didn't want to, or just say that that's a lie, Confronting it hasn't really come to fruition yet, but it's my goal to confront it.
Whew. How is it feeling to undertake that?
It feels good because it's kind of my natural tendency to confront and to push through things that are really hard. So like it's embodying of who I am, but it's also can be really emotionally taxing, especially when people who are your friends are still apologizing for the people that are abusive. So it's hard. It's not an easy journey, but I do have some wonderful support in the community who don't apologize for abuse. So thank God for that. And especially the women in the collective I just started, the Root Ibogaine Collective. Everybody's on the same page in dealing with this stuff and doing something about it. So
Good.
I'm so happy for that.
Good, yeah. Yeah, I'm curious if dealing with abuse and abusive facilitators and practitioners specifically changes your experience of the medicine at all, because I have an abusive person in my past who's not active in my life anymore, but we have like a lot of psychedelic history together, including kind of the beginning of my psychedelic journey. And sometimes I look back on that and I have this like sadness for how tainted it feels by that energy. And I'm like, was that even healing if it was in such a fucked up container? Like, how do you deal with that?
No, I think because what happened to me right off the bat was that I almost died in Guatemala. But when I woke up, I kind of didn't care because I was so transformed. And so, like, if anything was going to take the wind out of my sails, it was dying 6 times. But it didn't. So, like, there's not really much that's going to taint my relationship to Ibogaine. Now, my relationship to the community, yes. And especially because the person I dealt with abuse from was literally the first person that I had contact with in the Ibogaine world after my treatment. And he was a close friend and somebody I worked with all around the world. And so it was especially heartbreaking to have that original friend turn around and be abusive, and then to watch him not be held accountable and to continue to receive platform. So yeah, it doesn't affect my relationship with Ibogaine, but my relationship with community is definitely altered. Because when I first went to an Ibogaine conference, I felt like I had finally found my family. Like all these people who've been through what I've been through, like I felt like this is where I belong. And every time I was with everybody, it felt so good. It felt like a community that I've been looking for my whole life. And so for this to happen with one of the close people, one of my inner circle, it's really disruptive.
Yeah, such a betrayal. I feel like maybe there's something super insidious and sneaky at play too with emotional abuse, which I assume is primarily what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. It seems like people have a really hard time grokking the violence that can be encoded in that.
Yes, but sometimes, it's like, I wish that it would have been physical, because then people wouldn't question it. Like when it's sexual or physical abuse, there's no denying it. There are people who will still try to minimize it and say it's your fault, but it's less likely when it's physical. Once it's emotional, people are like, well, I don't know, he seems really nice to me.
Yes.
That's like the response I get. Or I've only had good reviews about his work. I feel like I've been having to plead my case to even friends and allies, like as if I'm on trial, as if like they're, checking my sources. And somebody said to me, she said, I believe your perspective, but I know that there's more than one perspective. You wouldn't say that to a woman who had been hit by her partner.
Right. Yeah.
And it's really shocking, some of these responses.
Do you take that as an indication of just how steeped we all are in the normalization of patriarchy?
Yes, totally. Exactly. It's super internalized. And I'm sure there's ways that I perpetuate it too. But it's the way that it's shown up recently for me has been really surprising and unexpected.
Well, I really appreciate your focus on women. I feel like, as you said, that's not like a 100% guarantee, but I do feel like a lot of the healing that's been going on underground in medicine world and just like, in communities of color, like for centuries has been driven by like really fierce female energy.
Definitely. I think because the majority of us have experienced violence from men in multiple forms, we're just better able to be present with somebody's pain and to be compassionate for it. And men have been typically so cut off from their emotions and like don't know how to express them. So how are you going to support someone going through a major life-changing psychedelic event when you haven't even figured out how to connect to your own feelings?
Oof.
And that's one of the things that I think really needs to be in place is everyone in the clinic needs to be in therapy, regular therapy, and should be paid for by the clinic.
What is the integration work that you do with your clients based around?
It's just based around things that I've learned from working in Ibogaine and from living it. I have a structure in place, but it really kind of changes based on what people have coming up. But I first start working with people ideally beforehand, and I try to help them identify like what it is they want, not what it is their family wants or society wants. Like what do they actually want, whether that's just reduced drug usage or none at all or whatever that is. And then like other goals as well for like, what do you want your daily life to feel like? What do you like it to be like? Like a lot of people who've been doing hard drugs for a long time don't even remember what they enjoy beyond drugs. And so it's a lot about talking about that and about setting up things before your treatment not just activities, but like positive community to be around. Like that's super essential, is that you're going to be going home to supportive friends and supportive family. Usually when Ibogaine doesn't work, it's because people go home to the same environment they were living in before they went down. So it's trying to help people set that up. And then afterwards, the first few sessions after Ibogaine, it's kind of like unpacking a lot of emotional stuff that's gotten brought up. And then over time, it turns into like, all right, are you making time for creativity every day? What does that feel like? Are you doing like journaling for yourself? Are you getting exercise? Are you just doing things that are fun? That's the other thing that doesn't get prioritized at all in our society, is like, what about things that are just enjoyable and not productive? And so really trying to get people to a place of like learning how to enjoy the world around them.
That must be super rewarding. I mean, that's amazing. What a cool way to interact with people.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I think people are expecting these like really rigid kind of structures of like, here's your recovery plan. And I hated that myself. So I do have guidelines that I go through, but I try to let people direct me and what they need, because the work I want to do, I don't want to give people something. I want to help people find their intuition and wisdom within and act on that. Because I think drug users especially have been so cut off from their inner power and made to say that they're powerless. Like that's the in the 12 steps, that's one of the first things, to say that you're powerless. Why would we want to tell people that they're powerless when their power has been taken away from them from such a young age? People need to be made to feel empowered. And so that's what I want to do in my work, is to help people feel powerful and that they do know the right things for them.
I assume that's not something that ever crossed your path until you came to this medicine.
Yeah, no, not at all. I didn't even know that, like, I remember when I went to my first conference, I thought everybody was going to be like 100% alcohol and substance free, which was not the case at all, because that's the paradigm that I had been like developed in, is, you have to stop doing all drugs forever. It's the only way. And so it really took me a while to realize, oh, wait a minute, that's not the only way at all, actually. So, and then that's kind of how I got introduced to harm reduction and that whole community around harm reduction and drug policy. And like, I'm excited about anything that has to do with changing the way drug users are treated and viewed.
Yeah, I was hoping you might talk about a couple of the models where that's functioning already in different communities.
Yeah, so I actually work at a place here in New York called the Center for Optimal Living, and it is a harm reduction psychotherapy center. So they're working with people that have issues related to substances, but in a way that there's no agenda pushing. It's not like you need to do this or to get better. It's like, what do you want to do? And then the therapists there help you work towards what you want to do. It's meeting people where they're at. This is Dr. Andrew Tatarski, his center. But yeah, it's all about helping people harness their own power, basically. I'm not working there as a therapist at the moment. I'm the program coordinator for their psychedelic program. But I'm like just so excited to be working with them, because this is the center that I wish I had found, 10 years ago. So I'm just so excited it exists. There's also places in San Francisco based on this philosophy, and other locations as well, but it's not widespread yet, that's for sure.
What was your experience in the jail system? It seems like that's sort of the catch-all for people that can't, make the 12-step thing. They can't choke that down.
Yeah, I mean, even after people go to jail, they're still trying to do 12 steps, though. Like, they keep trying to choke it down because there's nothing else available. There's no other help available in most small-town United States. It's just 12 steps. And even in jail, it's 12 steps, 12 steps. The jail I went to, they had this thing that was inside of the jail block called Project Recovery. That was essentially like 3 to 6 a.m. We went till night, all based it was like very like 1950s, like if you don't pass the first step, you're kicked out type of thing, like very rigid and militant. And the thing about it is that they would offer you this program as a way to reduce your sentence. So when I got sentenced, it was 6 months or release upon completion of Project Recovery. So of course I'm going to do the Project Recovery because it's only going to be 3 months. But the thing is that I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was like the jail got something around $100 a day for each inmate. But if you were in Project Recovery, the jail received $700 for you per day. So it was actually a money-making venture for them. And all of the women that I was in Project Recovery with, I ended up doing drugs with all of them later. You know, like that wasn't the thing that was going to work for us. It was very much like they were beating you into a mold. Mm-hmm. The perfect 12-step mold. Mm. And, you know, I think the women running that program have the best intentions. They just don't know any better.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like then they're ejecting you back out into the world, but they haven't actually given you any new coping skills except like how to follow somebody's structure. And you're back in the world that's not going to give you that. You're not going to have somebody breathing down your throat like that.
Exactly. And they tell you when you get out, you got to go to meetings. And I'm pretty sure every woman in my jail block was in there for a drug-related something. So clearly this system is not working well. Like, it's not helping drug users.
Turns out shame doesn't make people stop.
Right? I mean, it might pause it for a while. Like, you know, like I was on a pretty disastrous trajectory before I went into jail. I could have died in the next week. Who knows? So maybe it saved me from that. But it's not like a way to truly address the issue. And this is the other problem with the mainstream system is all of the focus gets put on the individual. As if they're the sole person they were born fucked up and it's their fault. It's like, no, it's a sick family. It's a sick society. We need to address these problems within the society. It's because we live in a capitalistic society that prioritizes success, productivity, money, career, getting recognition. That's where the sickness comes from. Mm-hmm. It's not the individual. And you're just made to feel like it's all your fault and that you're fucked up. Mm-hmm. Even the way your family treats you when you're going through it, because they just don't know any better either. I mean, it's a hard thing to deal with, but it's like really disheartening. And then they tell you, well, you just got to go to these meetings. And you go to these meetings, and I know a lot of people receive benefit from 12 steps, and I don't want to knock that. But for me personally, I just never felt inspired to be like any of the people in there. Everybody seems so like beaten down and like stuck in this thing that it's just so hard and I'm never going to get out of it, because that's essentially what they're telling you. You're never going to get out of it. You're sick for life. So it's like holding you hostage. I never felt like this is not what I want for my life, to be saying I'm an addict when I haven't done drugs in 20 years. Yeah. Why? Like, it never felt inspiring to me. And it also felt really religious and like Christianity based, and didn't resonate with that at all.
Is that the language that they're using?
I mean, it's not like they're not saying Jesus, but it's definitely reminiscent of church lingo in a lot of ways.
My sense is, too, that they really demonize, like, psychedelics, and any kind of outside-of-the-box medicine is just, like, lumped in with all the...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you want to piss off an NA meeting, go in there and share about your Ibogaine experience or ayahuasca experience. People will lose their minds. When, ironically, Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, was doing research on LSD and taking LSD himself, and wanted to make that a part of the AA program because it helped him so much, which everybody else was like vehemently against. But that gets conveniently edited out of the literature. I
guess it's just too threatening for the system.
Yeah, it's too threatening. There is a fellowship that founded a few years ago called Psychedelics in Recovery, which is cool because it's people that like 12 steps but are taking psychedelics. It's like the place they can go and share about that, which is nice. I go to the women's meeting. I don't I'm still not into the 12-step lingo aspect, but I like being there with other women.
Yeah, what a cool community.
Yeah, it's cool. So, some people really do get benefit from these meetings, and that's important. But in talking about it, I don't want people to feel discouraged when 12 steps doesn't resonate with them. Because
Yes.
it's like there are other options.
Is that why you feel like Ibogaine has exploded so much recently? Is because it has a pretty darn high success rate?
Yeah. I mean, the actual success rate is not really known. Like, there's been some research about how many people stop using drugs after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, but it's been really hard to define what the success rate is. But it's definitely higher than the 12-step program, which is like 5 to 6%.
Really?
Yeah. That's the official number that I've seen recently. And that's the gold standard in this country and in the legal system, which is insane. But Ibogaine, it's not guaranteed success. It's just a door opener. It really depends on what you do afterward. And honestly, my story is not that common where people do it once and that works and then they're like off and running. A lot of people do Ibogaine and relapse, but then they might do it again and it works then, or maybe it doesn't. So I think success can't only be measured by whether they stop using their drug of choice or not. Like, there's many different definitions to success. And so that's hard to measure in research.
I really appreciate you calling it a door opener, because I feel like, especially with some of these legalization or more medicalization movements, there's like this tendency to want to make psychedelics like a magic pill, and it's like
It's
so
really
not
dangerous.
about that. Yeah.
It's really dangerous because then people's expectations get set super high. And they're unrealistic. And so when they come out of IB and they still feel kind of sick and they're not feeling good, then people think it didn't work for me. Nothing's going to work for me. They get really discouraged, go back, use and overdose and die. Like, I've seen that happen. And so it's really important to manage people's expectations. When you're selling something as like a solution or a cure, the worst is when people are saying a cure with any plant medicine, but especially Ibogaine, because that is certainly not the case. There's not going to be a cure for drug use. It's a lifelong project working on your destructive patterns.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to cure it.
Yeah.
You're always going to be dealing with it in some aspect, even if you aren't using the same drug. So I really discourage people in the community from using the word cure or a solution or marketing it in a kind of magical way. There's like this woman who's making a documentary in the community who kind of like, she showed up out of nowhere, had never even worked with Ibogaine, and she started making this documentary that was saying Ibogaine is a cure. And it was just like super sensationalist and very like stereotypical, like spiritual bypassing California hippie language. And like a bunch of us have tried to call her out on it, and she has changed some of the languages, but her angle is still very like sensationalist, the way she's trying to sell Ibogaine, and it's just unrealistic, and it sets people up for failure and disappointment.
Yeah. I read that you're not like a super fan or not totally convinced that legalization or medicalization are going to be paths forward to making sure that this is a safer process with more integrity, which I feel really aligned with that. I just feel inherently suspicious of some of those paradigms. So yeah, I'm curious what you're...
Yeah, I mean, like, is the medical system we have now reliable for keeping people safe?
Right.
I don't know. Like, especially if you bring a psychedelic experience, with the way that psychedelics have been treated by the medical system, like, I don't really trust the model in the United States to be able to handle something like plant medicine in like a compassionate, supportive, nurturing way. And I'm not saying that like, people should just completely stop working on getting clinical trials, but I don't think that should be the focus. A lot of people are so super hyped on, we got to get it legal. But it's like, I don't know. We don't even have it stabilized in our own community yet. There's so many problems in our community now that need to be addressed before it can expand any further. Because it's like more and more clinics keep opening, and then more people go to the hospital because we don't have a governing body or like at least an organization to monitor people or like supervise people. So you can't really expand something that's dysfunctional and expect it to start working.
I've never thought about it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like, what are they going in the US? It'll cost $25,000. They want to take out the psychedelic element as much as possible. Like, what is it that it's just, I don't know. I'm not.
Like they actually want to alter the chemical so it's a less psychedelic experience?
Well, there's some people advocating for the development of something called MC18, and it's another alkaloid in iboga. It doesn't have the it attenuates opioid withdrawal. 18MC, sorry, I said it backwards. It gets rid of withdrawal, but it doesn't provide the psychedelic experience.
Jeez, because that would be what? People sneaking in some fun or something.
Yeah, I know. We wouldn't want that. Oh my God, it's like, I mean, anything that helps get rid of withdrawal is great, and I support it. I'm not saying I'm anti-development of 18MC, but it's just kind of also depressing. It's like, well, why just give them part of the experience?
Yes.
Why just dissect the experience? It's very colonizing. Again, it's very extractive and colonizing.
I feel that way about CBD too. It's just like you're just tearing this plant, teacher, in parts.
Oh yeah, I never thought about that with CBD. That's interesting.
So it sounds like you feel like to get the community stabilized, it's like really addressing interpersonal harm that has to be the next step.
Yeah, interpersonal harm, but also like harm from clinics that clinics are perpetuating by not upholding basic standards.
Well, it's, I mean, maybe a little scary to people that are just kind of cracking the door open on this to know that the process can be so fraught. But it sounds like you are laying kind of the foundation for a pathway that people can follow where they know that they'll be making good decisions and in good hands. Is that kind of like you can be a bit of a beacon for people that are called to this?
Yeah, I'm trying, and also with the help of the 4 other members of my collective too. They're also doing this work with me. Yeah, that's what we want to do. We want to create a structure so that people are supported. And there are good practitioners. It's not all bad, but it's definitely the minority. Is somebody like there's really only like 3 places, maybe 4, that I would send anybody to. So Double Blind right now has a very short list that is good places that I would recommend. And also, I have a guide up on my website of how to find a safe clinic. It's a list of really extensive questions to weed out who doesn't know what they're doing.
That's so valuable.
Yeah, it's innervision.com. InnerVisionIbogaine.com, sorry.
Okay, Inner Vision Ibogaine.
Yeah.
Do you have an ongoing relationship with the plant, or are you feeling like your work now is with preparation and integration?
I am not giving it to anyone, but I microdose with it myself sometimes. I don't really feel called to like high dose or just regular dose psychedelics anymore. Like I'm not interested. Like it's really stressful and like it's really taxing on my nervous system. So I only microdose things now, which I find like really powerful. It works best for me.
Yeah, I imagine facilitating at that level too. It's just that's so much responsibility. I could see that taking a lot out of you.
No, and also it's almost impossible to facilitate safely in the United States. I mean, I do know some people doing it, but you're not going to have a doctor present.
Yeah.
Because who's going to want to risk their license? So it's like you would need to do it like really close to a hospital in case something happened. And I personally don't feel safe. Although I do know some providers that are super experienced and have figured out how to navigate doing it within the U.S. But for me, I don't think that like my personal abilities are best harnessed by being an ibogaine provider. I think that the work I'm doing now makes more sense for my natural passions and abilities. So there's plenty of people providing ibogaine. I don't need to be doing it also. I can advise people and support others in doing it, which I'm always happy to do. But I don't feel the need to be giving it to people right now.
When you said that the medicine showed you that your experiences, including the challenging ones, have prepared you to do what you're here to do, what do you feel like that mission is?
Well, what I'm doing right now, with the collective, making the community safer, helping people before and after their treatment. And also, I'm really excited about supporting providers in the community. And one of the things that our collective wants to do is to offer like a monthly meeting for providers to check in and get advice. And we want to create some kind of a platform where like information can get shared. Because oftentimes there's like, like I have a friend who's a provider that regularly gets calls in the middle of the night from panicked people who are in the middle of a treatment saying, oh my God, this is what's happening on the EKG. What do I do?
Jeez.
And so all the time. And so I would love to create something where like people can communicate easily and quickly to support each other, create like a better, because right now it's like, there's a good amount of hostility between people working in the community. Like I would want to see a more collaborative community in the future where people are supporting and helping each other. And not just with safety stuff in the clinic, but personal stuff, like there's a lot of providers who relapse, who are like doing opioids while giving Ibogaine. And they're so ashamed of relapsing, and they're so ashamed of the gossip that'll come when people find out that they don't tell anybody.
Oh man.
And multiple providers have died, and it's like there needs to be more of a supportive, compassionate network to really support people in doing this work, especially when so many of us have such big trauma histories.
It almost reminds me of the vibe in like fundamental religious communities where like the shame quotient is high for anybody outside the box. It's like a dysfunctional family vibe almost.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's definitely, so many people working in the community are coming from dysfunctional, abusive families. So why is that going to change in a year or two or even longer? It's like, it's something that has to be transformed through healing and support. And right now, I wouldn't describe the community of those. I think it's just a bit hostile between people. There are pockets of support for sure, but it's like it's small groups. It's not like widespread throughout the community where it's like you could say, I'm a provider and I'm relapsing. Please, can people support me? Like no one's doing that. No one feels comfortable doing that.
Man, I'm so like blown away by your dedication to taking this on, and like really grateful because I know a couple people who similarly feel like, yeah, their life was saved by this medicine. And so I really appreciate that you're making it more accessible and safe to people who are like already the most vulnerable people in our society.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be doing it, and also super grateful for my collective members for doing it with me, because it's not just me. It's like I might be the loud voice, but there's many of us who are supporting this work and want to address these issues.
Yeah, may that continue to grow.
It will. I feel pretty confident.
Man, well, thank you for sharing. I have total like faith in you and can see it happening already. So I'm really excited to learn more about what you're doing. Thank you for taking the time.
Of course, I'm happy to be talking to you about it. Thanks for reaching out to me.
Please go find Juliana on the internet at innervisionibogaine.com and go read her articles in Double Blind magazine, which is a badass women-run psychedelic magazine, if you haven't already checked it out, and chacruna.net, another psychedelic platform run by women. I really believe that the arc of things are bending towards good change, out with these old broken systems and in with the new. That doesn't mean that there's not grief and loss and fear in that transition as we leave behind what we've known, which we've been taught over and over again means that we're safe. And I honor all of you as you open yourselves to what new is coming and all the beautiful uncertainty and possibility that comes with that. Thank you. I see you. If you want to connect with me, I'm also on the internet at marajames.com. I'll see you out there.